Hello everyone! Today, I'm going over a budget commander deck that I've brewed around Dina, Soul Steeper. As usual, I've designed this deck to list for less than $45 at the time of recording, using prices listed by Scryfall, including our basic lands at 10 cents each, but not including costs such as shipping. Anyway, Dina, Soul Steeper, is a 1/3 legendary Dryad Druid, costing a black and a green to cast, and has it so whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. And for 1 mana, you can sack a creature to give Dina plus X power for the turn, where X is the power of the sacrificed creature. So for this particular deck, I've decided to lean primarily into Dina's first effect, where we're going to look to get as many instances of life gain as we can, wherever and whenever we can. We won't particularly care about how much life we gain in a given instance, as gaining 1 life or gaining 10 life in a go still results in our opponents losing 1 life regardless, but by gaining 1 or 2 life here, there, and everywhere, we'll be slowly but surely draining life totals while hopefully keeping ourselves reasonably healthy. We'll have a fairly decent number of creatures to get on the board to keep the pressure up and to act as blockers, and of course we could always choose to use Dina's activated ability with them, and as we'll see later, we even have some sources of creature tokens that we'll definitely want to kill off reasonably quickly, so that sack outlet on our commander may still be fairly relevant. But I don't want to blather on too long here, so let's get into the 99 of this deck, starting with our ramp. I'll be starting with our land-based ramp, so we have Farseek letting us tutor for a plains, mountain, island, or swamp card, which we can put onto the battlefield tapped, of which we have a few duels I'll mention in the land section that this spell is intended to target, aside from just our basic swamps of course. But following that, we have Steve as a body that we can get onto the field and can sack at any time to tutor a basic land onto the battlefield tapped, and Cultivate in Kodama's Reach, which let us tutor for 2 basic lands, which will reveal, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, and the other into our hand. And then we'll close out this section with Arcane Signet to tap for any color we could need, and Pristine Talisman, tapping for generic, but it also has a gain us life when we tap for that mana. But now, let's move on to the bulk of the spells that will help us gain little bits of life gain throughout the game. Starting with Fountain of Renewal, a 1-drop artifact that has us gain 1 life at the beginning of our upkeep, and we could sack it to draw at a later point if needed. Creeping Bloodsucker, a 1/2 that deals 1 damage to each opponent at the beginning of our upkeep, and you gain life equal to the damage dealt that way. Quiet Disrepair, which enchants an artifact or enchantment, and then on your upkeep you either destroy the enchanted permanent, if being used as an interaction piece, or we gain 2 life. Sinister Monolith, which at the beginning of our combat has each opponent lose 1 life and ourselves gain 1, and we can also sack it to draw 2, though only at sorcery speed. And Dogged Pursuit, which has each opponent lose 1 life and ourselves gain 1 at the beginning of our end step. Then Jadi Offshoot, Retreat to Kazandu, and Retreat to Hagra each let us gain life whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, with Jadi having us gain 1, Kazandu gain 2, or we could put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and Hagra has each opponent lose 1 life and us gain 1 life, or we could give a creature +1 power and Death Touch for the turn. Then Spectrum Sentinel is a 1-drop 1/2 with protection from multicolored, and has us gain life whenever a non-basic land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control. And Polluted Bonds has it so whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player loses 2 life, and we gain 2 life. Death Creator lets us gain 1 life whenever another creature dies, not just our own. And likewise, Blood Artist has a target creature lose 1 life, and us gain 1 whenever it or another creature dies. And Profane Memento has us gain life whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere. Essence Warden, Prosperous Innkeeper, and Social Climber have you gain 1 life whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, with Prosperous Innkeeper also making a treasure token as it enters. And Tablet of the Guilds is a 2-drop artifact that has you choose 2 colors when it enters the battlefield, and whenever you cast a spell you gain 1 life for each of the chosen color that it is. Revenge of Ravens makes it so whenever a creature attacks us, or our non-existent planeswalkers, the creature's controller loses 1 life and we gain 1. And Sundrop has it so whenever we're dealt damage, it gains that many charge counters, and then at the beginning of each upkeep, we can remove a charge counter from Sundroplet to gain 1 life. Sanguine Siphoner has each opponent lose 1 life and you gain 1 whenever it attacks. And Karsi Revenant is a 3/3 with flying, death touch, and lifelink, and when in the grave we can pay 2 and a black to exile it from the graveyard, and for that we can put a flying counter, death touch counter, and lifelink counter on a target creature, at sorcery speed. Now while this certainly isn't all of the sources of our life gain, I would like to go over some cards that don't directly give us life, but still synergize well with the overall strategy nicely. Starting with Epicure of Blood, Marauding Blight Priest, and Starscape Cleric, each of which have it so whenever you gain life, each opponent loses life, basically doubling up on our Dina pain, and Starscape Cleric even has Offspring as a way to get a copy of it onto the field. Trudge Garden can let us widen our board quite nicely, as whenever we gain life, we can pay 2 to create a 4/4 green fungus beast creature token with trample. But for other creature token generation, we have Sedgemoor Witch, which makes a 1/1 green-black pest creature token that has us gain 1 life whenever it dies, whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell. And Belladros Witherbloom has us make one of those pests at the beginning of each upkeep, and can let us pay 10 life to untap all of our lands, though we can only activate that once per turn. And Valentine, Dean of the Vein, is a 1/1 with Menace and Lifelink that exiles their opponent's non-token creatures when they die. And when you're exiling those creatures, you can pay 2 to make the same 1/1 pest creature tokens. Though this card does actually have another spell on its flip side with Lisette, Dean of the Root, a 4/4 that lets you pay 1 whenever you gain life to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and give those creatures trample until the end of the turn. Urborg Repossession is a 1-drop sorcery letting us return a creature card from our grave to our hand and we gain 2 life. But if it was kicked, we can return an additional target permanent card from our grave to our hand. While Vanewitch Coven is a 3/3 with Menace that lets us pay 1 black mana whenever we gain life to return a target creature card from our grave to our hand. And finally for this section, I've slotted in Excalibur 2, an equipment that gets a charge counter whenever you gain life, and its equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each charge counter on it. But with that, let's now move on to our various sources of draw. I'll start with Sign in Blood, Night's Whisper, and Foreboding Fruit to have you or target player draw 2 and lose 2 life, but if at least 3 black mana was spent to cast Foreboding Fruit, we also make a food token for some later life gain. Read the Bones has us scry 2, draw 2, then lose 2 life, and Damnable Pact is an X cost spell having a target player draw X and lose X life. Necrologia is a bit of a weird one, as you cast it during your end step and pay X life while doing so to draw X cards, and Harmonize has you simply draw 3 cards. Mosswood Dread Knight can give us a bit of recursive draw, as its adventure, Dread Whispers, has you draw 1 life and lose 1 life, but then as a creature, it's a 3/2 with trample, and when it dies, you can cast its adventure from your graveyard until the end of your next turn, which would allow you to once again cast this creature from exile. Phyrexian Arena simply has you draw a card and lose 1 life at the beginning of your upkeep, and Well of Lost Dreams has it so whenever you gain life, you can pay X, with X being less than or equal to the amount of life gained, to draw X cards. And finally, Cosmos Elixir procs at the beginning of your end step, having you either draw 1 if your life total is greater than your starting life total, or otherwise, we gain 2 life. And now let's move on to talk about the ways that we can interact with what our opponents are doing. Starting with Nature's Claim to destroy a target artifact or enchantment, and its controller gains 4 life, useful to interact with, or, if we really wanted to, we could use it on ourselves to gain that life. Natural End destroys a target artifact or enchantment and gives us 3 life. And Breathe Your Last lets you destroy a target creature or planeswalker, and we gain 1 life for each of its colors. Abrupt Decay can't be countered and lets us destroy a target non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less. And Mortality Spear lets us destroy a target non-land permanent and can cost 2 less to cast if we gain life that turn. Infernal Grasp destroys a target creature and we lose 2 life. And Krosan Grip lets us destroy a target artifact or enchantment, and it has Split Second, so players can't cast spells or activate abilities so long as this spell is on the stack. Haywire Might is a 1-drop that has you gain 2 life when it dies, and for 1 green mana we can sack it to exile a target non-creature artifact or non-creature enchantment. Scavenging Ooze is a bit of graveyard hate, letting you pay 1 green to exile a target card from a graveyard, and if it were a creature card that got exiled, Scavenging Ooze gets a +1/+1 counter, and you gain 1 life. And Pest Infestation is an X-cost spell, letting you destroy up to X target artifacts, and then you make twice X 1/1 pest creature tokens that have you gain 1 life when they die. And for a smidge of protection, Tameo Safekeeping gives a target permanent you control hexproof and indestructible until the end of the turn, and you gain 2 life. And finally, for some mass disruption, Essence Pulse has you gain 2 life, and then each creature gets -X for the turn, where X is the amount of life you gain that turn. And then Azuri's Predation has you make a 4/4 Phyrexian Beast creature token for each creature your opponents control, and then each of those tokens fights a different one of those creatures. But now that we've gone through all the spells on this deck, let's go over our land base. Starting with some duels, we have Haunted Mire and Woodland Chasm, which ETB tapped, but since they're swamp forests, these two should be the first targets we search for when we cast Farseek. Temple of Malady has a scry 1 when it enters the battlefield, while Command Tower will tap for any color we could need and enters untapped, and Path of Ancestry does the same but enters tapped. But if we cast a creature with mana produced from it that shares a creature type with our commander, we get to scry 1. Then Jungle Hollow has us gain 1 life as it enters the battlefield, and Gingerbread Cabin is a forest that enters untapped if you control at least 3 other forests, And if it enters untapped, you make a food token. Sapseep Forest is also a forest land, but we can pay 1 green and tap it to gain a life, provided we control 2 or more green permanents. And Riveteer's Overlook is immediately sacked upon entering, and having you tutor a basic swamp, mountain, or forest onto the battlefield tapped, and then you shuffle and gain 1 life. While Adventurer's Inn and Radiant Fountain tap for generic, but have you gain 2 life when they enter. But aside from that, we'll fill the rest of this deck with 13 basic forests and 14 basic swamps. And now that we've gone through all the cards in this deck, let's take a look at that price. And as you can see here, this deck is currently listing for just under $45 at the time of recording, which does include those basic lands at 10 cents each, but this is also just a list price, so it doesn't include costs like taxes, shipping, and the like. And before closing out this video, let's go over a few cards that I think you might want to consider if upgrading or wanting to build this deck with a bit higher budget. First up, we have 3 Visits in Nature's Lore, which we could use to tutor out Haunted Mire, Woodland Chasm, Gingerbread Cabin, or Sapseep Forest. Whip of Erebos and Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose, are both solid ways to spread lifelink among our creatures, which could lead to a lot of life drain, as each instance of a lifelink creature dealing damage is an instance of life gain, even if all those triggers happen in the same combat. Bontu's Monument and Leyline of Vitality are a couple of ways that we can gain life on either casting our creatures or creatures entering the battlefield under our control, with the former also letting us cast our black creatures on the cheap. And while we aren't too focused on sacking in this particular deck, High Market might still be a nice bit of backup regardless, especially for things like those pest creature tokens. Subversion is another solid bit of life gain on our upkeep, as at that time, it has each opponent lose 1 life, and ourselves gaining life equal to the amount of life lost that way. And the final suggestion I'll make here is Imp's Mischief for some spell redirection in black, as a reasonably versatile interaction piece. But I should close out this video, so if you'd like to build, adapt, upgrade, or otherwise play with this deck, the link, as always, is in the description down below. If you liked the video, consider dropping it a like, and maybe drop a sub while you're there. But regardless, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.